The man in the black suit didn't look at the face of the girl he threw into the back of the SUV. He only saw the red dress, the same dress the senator's daughter was supposed to wear tonight. He slammed the door, the locks clicking like a death sentence. In the front seat, the man everyone feared, the king of the concrete, sat in silence. He didn't care about tears. He only cared about the leverage this girl provided. But as they drove away from the bright lights of the city, the girl didn't scream.
She didn't beg.
She just sat there, her hand shaking as she held a cheap plastic locket. When the car stopped at the hidden mountain estate, the boss finally turned around. His eyes, cold as winter, met hers. He froze. The girl in the red dress wasn't the senator's daughter. She was someone else, someone thin, pale, and wearing shoes that had been glued back together. "You're not her," he whispered, his voice like grinding stones. His men panicked, realizing they had snatched a nobody from a bus stop. The boss looked at her bruised arm and the way she stared at him with zero fear, only a deep, tired sadness. He should have killed her or thrown her out, but he didn't. "I'm sorry, I'm not worth anything," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She told him her name was June and that she worked 2 jobs just to pay for her mother's medicine. The boss, a man who had never felt a second of guilt, felt a strange pull in his chest. He saw the marks on her wrists from a life of hard work, not the soft life of a rich girl. He realized that if he let her go now, his enemies would find her just to get to him.
She was a witness now.
She was a liability. But looking at her, he saw a light he hadn't seen in years. His lead guard stepped forward, gun drawn, waiting for the order to clean up the mistake. The boss held up a hand. The room went silent. He walked over to June, who was still shivering in her cheap dress. He took off his heavy wool coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. It smelled like expensive wood and power. "The world thinks you're a ghost now," he told her. He looked his men in the eye, daring them to move. "She stays. I kidnapped the wrong girl, but I'm keeping her anyway." June didn't know if she was a guest or a prisoner. The house was a fortress of marble and glass, but it felt like a cage. Every night, the boss sat at the head of a long table, eating in silence. One night, June walked into the dining room and sat down right next to him instead of at the far end. She pushed a plate of simple toast toward him. "You look like you haven't slept in a decade," she said. No one had ever dared to speak to him like that. He should have been angry, but he just looked at the toast and then at her. The boss began to realize that June wasn't afraid of him because she had already lived through a nightmare. Her father was gone, her mother was sick, and she had been fighting for every penny. To her, a man with a gun was nothing compared to the fear of an empty fridge. He started staying home more. He watched her walk through his gardens. He bought her books and clothes, but she only ever asked for one thing: to send money to her mother anonymously. He did it not because he was kind, but because he wanted to see her smile. One evening, the peace was shattered. A rival gang found the estate, thinking the senator's daughter was still there. Bullets shattered the glass of the conservatory. The boss didn't run for his own gun first, he ran for June. He tackled her to the floor, shielding her body with his own. As the sirens echoed in the distance and his guards cleared the perimeter, he looked down at her. She was bleeding from a small cut on her forehead. He felt a rage he had never known. He didn't just want to protect her anymore. He realized he couldn't live without her. The boss, whose name was Silas, didn't sleep that night. He sat in a leather chair outside June's bedroom door with a loaded pistol on his lap. He realized that by keeping her, he had painted a target on a girl who had nothing. In the morning, he sent his best doctor to find June's mother in the city. He gave orders to move the mother to a private hospital under a fake name, paying for everything in cash. He didn't tell June yet because he didn't want to give her hope that he might let her go. He was a selfish man, and he wanted her light to stay in his dark house. June started to change the atmosphere of the cold stone mansion. She cleaned the kitchen herself, refusing to let the maids do it, and the smell of fresh bread began to replace the scent of cigar smoke. Silas found himself leaving his office early, just to watch her work. He liked the way she hummed old songs that reminded him of a childhood he had forgotten. One afternoon, he handed her a small cell phone. "Your mother is safe," he said shortly. When June heard her mother's voice on the other end, she cried so hard she fell to her knees. Silas reached out to catch her, his large hands trembling. The men in Silas's inner circle started to whisper. They saw their leader becoming soft. They didn't understand that he wasn't becoming weak. He was becoming dangerous in a new way. A man with nothing to lose is scary, but a man with something to protect is a monster. One of his lieutenants, a greedy man named Miller, decided to sell the secret of June's identity to the rivals Silas had offended. Miller thought June was just a mistake that needed to be erased. He didn't realize Silas had already decided she was the only thing in the world that mattered. Silas took June to the roof of the mansion to look at the stars. He told her about his life, how he grew up on the streets and had to fight for every scrap of food. It was the first time he had ever told the truth to anyone. June listened, her hand resting near his on the cold metal railing. She told him that she didn't see a boss. She saw a man who was lonely. "You didn't kidnap me," she whispered. "You rescued me from a life that was killing me anyway." Silas felt a lump in his throat and turned away so she wouldn't see his eyes. The betrayal happened on a Tuesday. Silas was away at a meeting when Miller opened the back gates for the rival gang. They didn't come for money. They came to take June to use as bait. June was in the library when the door kicked open. She didn't scream. She picked up a heavy glass award from Silas's desk and stood her ground. She managed to break a window to set off the silent alarm before they grabbed her. By the time Silas's phone buzzed with the alert, his car was already screaming down the highway at 100 miles per hour. When Silas arrived, the library was a mess of broken glass and blood.
June was gone.
He found Miller hiding in the garage, trying to flee. Silas didn't use a gun. He used his bare hands. He didn't care about the rules of the underworld anymore. He demanded to know where they took her. Miller, terrified by the look of pure animal rage in Silas's eyes, gave up the location of an old shipyard. Silas didn't call for backup. He didn't wait for his army. He got back in his car, his knuckles bleeding, and drove toward the water. He found her tied to a chair in a freezing warehouse. The rival boss was laughing, holding a knife to June's throat, waiting for Silas to beg. But Silas didn't beg. He walked into the middle of the room, wide open, and dropped his weapons. "Take me instead," Silas said, his voice flat and steady. "She has nothing to do with this." June looked at him, her eyes wide with terror, shaking her head no. For the first time in 30 years, the most feared man in the city was willing to die for someone who couldn't give him any power. The rivals didn't kill Silas immediately. They wanted to break him first. They tied him to a pillar right across from June, so she had to watch them beat him. Every time a blow landed, June screamed for them to stop, promising she would do anything they asked. Silas just looked at her through the blood in his eyes and smiled a tiny, broken smile. He was showing her that he could endure anything as long as she was still breathing. The rival boss grew frustrated because Silas wouldn't make a sound, no matter how hard they hit him. In the middle of the night, when the guards were tired, Silas used a piece of metal he had hidden in his sleeve to pick the locks on his chains. His ribs were broken and his face was swollen, but he moved like a shadow. He reached June and cut her ropes with a fallen pocket knife. He didn't tell her to run. He told her to hide. "If I don't make it out," he whispered, pressing his forehead against hers, "the lawyer has a file. You and your mother will be rich forever." June grabbed his shirt and refused to let go. "I don't want the money," she sobbed. "I want you." They tried to escape through the shipping containers, but the guards spotted them. Silas pushed June into an empty crate and locked it from the outside to keep her safe. He stood in front of the crate with a metal pipe, facing 6 men with guns. He fought like a man possessed, taking a bullet to the shoulder, but refusing to fall. Just as the rival boss aimed a final shot at Silas's head, the warehouse doors burst open. Silas's loyal men, led by his most trusted driver, poured in. The warehouse turned into a battlefield of smoke and fire. When the smoke cleared, Silas crawled to the crate and pulled the lever. June fell into his arms, and they both collapsed onto the cold concrete. The police were coming, and Silas knew he couldn't stay. He had to disappear into the shadows again to keep her clean from his crimes. He put her in his driver's car and told him to take her to the hospital. "Go," Silas ordered. June screamed his name as the car pulled away, watching him stand alone in the rain of sparks from the burning building. He looked like a king standing in the ruins of his kingdom. For 3 weeks, June didn't see Silas. She was placed in a high-security penthouse with her mother. There were flowers delivered every single day, but no card. She had all the clothes she wanted, the best food, and her mother was getting better every day. But June felt like she was dying inside. She realized that the wrong girl, mistake, was the only thing that had ever made her feel seen. She started to realize that Silas hadn't just kidnapped her body, he had taken her heart, and she didn't want it back. June decided to bait him. She knew Silas was watching her through cameras or guards. She went to the park where they first met, the bus stop where the mistake happened. She sat on the bench in the middle of the night, wearing the same cheap red dress. She sat there for hours in the cold, waiting. She knew he couldn't resist making sure she was safe. Around 3 a.m., a black SUV pulled up slowly. The window rolled down, and there he was, his face scarred and his arm in a sling. He didn't get out of the car. "You should be at home," he said, his voice cracking. "It's not safe for you out here." June walked to the car and opened the door herself. She sat in the passenger seat and buckled her seatbelt. "I'm not going home unless you're there," she said. Silas looked at her, his cold heart finally breaking into 1,000 pieces. He realized he couldn't protect her by staying away. He could only protect her by being by her side. He drove them back to the mansion, finally accepting his fate. The next few months were a golden cage period. Silas tried to go legitimate. He started selling off his illegal businesses, trying to become the man June deserved. But the underworld doesn't let people leave that easily. The other families saw his change of heart as a sign of retirement and began to move in on his territory. Silas didn't care about the money or the power anymore, but he cared about the safety of his household. He spent his days in meetings and his nights sitting on the floor by June's feet, reading her stories. June noticed the stress on his face. She saw him getting thinner and the dark circles under his eyes getting deeper. She realized that by staying with him, she was making him a target for everyone who wanted his throne. One night, she found a suitcase under the bed filled with passports and cash. Silas was planning an escape for her, not for himself. He was going to stay and fight the war while he sent her to an island where no one could find her. She confronted him, throwing the passports on his desk. "I'm not leaving you to die alone," she shouted. Silas stood up, his height towering over her, but she didn't flinch. "You are a civilian, June. You don't belong in this world of blood," he yelled back. It was the first time he had ever raised his voice at her. June stepped forward and slapped him, then immediately pulled him into a hug. Silas froze, then buried his face in her neck and wept. He was tired of being the king. He just wanted to be a man who loved a woman. The war came to their doorstep on a Sunday morning. It wasn't a raid. It was a legal attack. The police, paid off by Silas's enemies, arrived with a warrant for his arrest based on the kidnapping of June. It was a clever move. If Silas fought the police, he'd be killed. If he went to jail, his enemies would kill him inside. June realized she was the only one who could save him. She had to testify that she wasn't kidnapped, that she went with him voluntarily. But that would mean she could go to jail for lying to the FBI. In the interrogation room, a cold-faced agent showed June photos of Silas's crimes. "He's a monster, June. He took you by mistake and kept you like a toy. Tell us the truth, and you go free." June looked at the photos, then looked at the agent. She thought about the way Silas held her when she had nightmares. She thought about how he saved her mother. She looked at the camera in the corner of the room, knowing Silas was likely watching from a holding cell. "I love him," she said clearly. "I chose to stay." The statement caused a scandal that rocked the city. The Mafia's Muse became the headline of every newspaper. The charges were dropped because of a lack of a complaining witness, but Silas was now exposed. He was no longer a mysterious shadow, he was a celebrity criminal. When he was released, he met June on the steps of the courthouse. Thousands of cameras flashed. Silas took off his jacket and draped it over her head to hide her from the world, whisking her into a waiting car. They fled to a small cabin in the woods, far from the city. For a few weeks, they lived like normal people. They chopped wood, cooked over a fire, and walked in the trees. Silas learned how to laugh again. He told June he wanted to marry her, not with a giant diamond, but with a simple silver band he had made himself. But the piece was a lie. Silas knew his past was a ghost that would never stop chasing him. He spent his nights watching the perimeter, waiting for the final showdown. The final hour began with a phone call. Silas's old driver had been captured. The message was simple: bring the girl to the old bridge or everyone she loves dies. Silas knew it was a trap, and he knew he wouldn't survive it. He drugged June's tea that night so she would sleep deeply. He kissed her forehead, left a letter on her pillow, and drove out into the night alone. He intended to end the war by sacrificing himself so that June and her mother would finally be left in peace. Silas arrived at the bridge, which was shrouded in fog. He stood in the center, arms raised, as a dozen cars surrounded him. The rival bosses stepped out, laughing. They had finally won. But Silas had wired the bridge with explosives. He wasn't there to surrender. He was there to take the entire underworld down with him. He held the detonator in his hand, his thumb hovering over the button. "If I go to hell," Silas shouted into the wind, "I'm taking all of you with me to make sure she's safe." Suddenly, a car roared through the blockade. It was June. She hadn't drunk the tea. She had suspected him and poured it out. She jumped out of the car and ran toward him, ignoring the guns pointed at her. "If you push that button, you kill me too," she screamed. The rivals hesitated, confused by her bravery. Silas was horrified. "Get out of here, June. This is my debt to pay." She reached him and grabbed his hand, the one holding the detonator. "We pay it together," she said, her eyes burning with a fierce love. The rival boss, moved by a moment of strange respect or perhaps just shock, lowered his gun. In that moment of hesitation, Silas's loyalists, who had been hiding in the water below, launched a surprise attack. It was a chaotic, final battle on the bridge. Silas fought with June at his back, protecting her with every move. He took a bullet in the leg but kept swinging. By the time the sun began to rise, the rivals were either dead or fleeing. The bridge was still standing, and so were they. The world thought Silas died that night. A body was found in the river wearing his ring, but it was a decoy. Silas and June disappeared. They moved to a small town in the Midwest where no one knew their names. Silas grew a beard and worked as a carpenter. June became a teacher. They lived in a small white house with a porch swing. Her mother lived in a small cottage just down the road, finally healthy and happy. The king of the concrete was dead, and in his place was just a man named Sam. Years passed. One afternoon, June was sitting on the porch with a young son who had Silas's dark eyes. Silas came home from work, covered in sawdust, and handed her a single wild rose. They looked out at their quiet street, a million miles away from the blood and the marble of their old life. Silas still had scars on his back and a limp in his walk, but he never looked back. He often thought about the night his men grabbed the wrong girl, and how it was the only thing that ever went right in his life. The story ends with a close-up of June's hand. She is still wearing the cheap plastic locket from the first night they met, but inside is a picture of Silas and their son. She looks at the camera and whispers, "He kept me." Silas sits down next to her, puts his arm around her, and the screen fades to black as the sound of a peaceful summer evening fills the air. The mistake was over, but the choice to stay was forever.